Hi everybody and welcome to Passable Media, I'm Adam. This is the second of 2 videos in a row that will touch at least somewhat on the subject of gender, which can be a touchy subject for some. This channel is about media, games, TV and film, and not about politics of the gendered variety or otherwise, and any comments which try and drag the conversation in that direction are going to be deleted regardless of what side you take. With that said, today we're going to be talking about the Tal Symbiote in Star Trek Discovery, and in particular, the current host Adira and the former host Gray, and how I feel they've been portrayed in this season for good and for ill. Spoilers for Season 3, obviously. I am both an apologist and a naysayer when it comes to Star Trek Discovery. I'm very much the opinion that the only reason they're in the future now is because of the backlash from the amount of retcons and handwaves from the first season, and I feel like that's epitomised by the main story arc of this season, which could just as well have taken place in a post-Klingon War Federation. I think that it's a shame that they didn't go the route of a morally compromised Federation or focus on the Time War, and I do hate that Michael is rewarded all the time for her constant dismissiveness towards authority and repeatedly lucks into saving the day with an ends justify the means mentality. I don't like that the Klingons have been redesigned again, and I super don't like that Unification 3, what should have been a seminal episode of Discovery and of Star Trek in general, was overshadowed by Michael's personal life. Okay, so maybe I just don't like Michael. However, I love the extended cast, and I love that the writers are getting the chance to spread their wings in the future setting. I even like the Spore Drive as a concept, and I don't think it wrecks Trek as much as people think it does, any more than Soji being able to use the Borg's transwarp conduits does, which is to say not at all. The series' take on the Trill symbiotes encompasses many of my overall feelings of Discovery in miniature, in that they're very mixed. Trill symbiotes in the Star Trek universe are a sentient, long-lived life form that can be surgically implanted within a host, almost exclusively a Trill. As there are less symbiotes than there are Trill, the joining is considered a supreme honour and something that's required to work towards. This allows the symbiote to experience life outside of the pools in which they're born, while giving the host the benefits of access to the amassed knowledge, memories and skills of the previous host. After 93 hours of being joined, the two become dependent on one another, with one dying in short order if removed from the other. The Trill were first seen in The Next Generation, where it's shown that a human, in this case William Riker, can act as a host for a symbiote, albeit temporarily and at great risk to their health and certain rejection and death in short order. Up until now, our most in-depth look at the Trill and their symbiotes was in the form of Jadzia Dax on Deep Space Nine. We were introduced to the Zintara, a ritual process which uses the most trusted friends of the current host to telepathically take on the consciousness of the previous hosts and allow them to actually meet and interact, as opposed to simply being memories. Late in Deep Space Nine's run, when Jadzia Dax died, her symbiote was recovered but began to die on the journey back to the planet Trill for rejoining. And so a Trill who was not originally intended to receive a symbiote, Ezri, became Ezri Dax to save the symbiote. Compounding the abnormality of the situation, usually joined Trill are strongly discouraged from forming long-term attachments with those a previous host were close to, in particular romantic ones, but Ezri was assigned to Deep Space Nine at Sisko's request anyway. In addition, it's worth noting that while the rhetoric given to the people is that only 1 in 1,000 Trill are actually compatible with the symbiotes, the truth of the matter is that about 50% of them are. The lie is upheld only because of the disparity in population between the Trill and the symbiotes, and the possible conflict that could arise from treating the symbiotes as a commodity rather than an honour. This was a short explanation of what we know of the Trill, and it most certainly doesn't cover everything, but these are the things that need to be understood to properly wade through the situation of the Tal Symbiote in Discovery. Adira is a non-binary human and the current host to the Tal Symbiote. The writers have very much made a point of saying outside of the show that their non-binary nature has nothing to do with the symbiote, and let me just say, thank God. It would have been a super iffy thing to do to go down that route, even with the abnormality of the situation, since gender and sexuality have never been something influenced by the symbiote in the past. As it stands, Adira as a character is pretty solid, and blessedly little is made of their gender identity outside of Adira themselves while in an amnesiac state. As ever with this sort of thing, I don't have a dog in the race, but it doesn't hurt the story, and this kind of representation means something to someone, and that's really all that matters. Hurts nobody, helps somebody, etc. Anyway. When we meet Adira, they are already joined with the Tal symbiote, and it's very much left up to interpretation whether medical science has improved over the intervening centuries to the point where humans can now somewhat safely act as hosts, or whether Adira is special in their relationship with the former host Gray or otherwise. It would be fair to assume that in much the same way as 50% of the Trill are viable hosts for the symbiotes rather than the perceived 0.1%, perhaps there is in fact a percentage of humans that are viable as well, and it just so happens that the only previously noted human host, Riker, was simply not one of them. I'd very much like to see the why of it explored in later seasons, but this isn't terribly important here. While the original joining seems to have been less successful than with Riker, in that Adira's own memories were damaged and those of the symbiote are not initially shared properly, this changes after being submerged in the pools of the caves of Makala in something similar to a solo Zintara ritual, with Burnham acting in a similar role to a Guardian. A side effect of this is that a telepathic echo of Gray begins to appear to Adira, and the two regularly interact from then onwards. This is odd, and has been the focus of a lot of anger from some portions of the fanbase, but can be explained somewhat by the joining with a human being a mostly unexplored situation, with the additional compounding effect of the experience in the pools and our previous knowledge of the Zintara ritual clearly making an ability at least something like this possible. I understand that people will have a problem with this, but the building blocks for it were already there. The Echo of Gray even experiences distress at its continued existence, but inability to communicate with anyone other than Adira, which I'd argue lends even more credence to this being a bit of a Zintara gone wrong situation, though I'd be very interested to know whether the physical manifestation of Gray is actually there. Not in the sense of whether Adira sees him there, that's a given, but whether he could stand on a corner and tell them what's around it when Adira themselves could not see, given that he doesn't actually have a physical form and is presumably projected in a way from the Tal Symbiont. Where on first viewing at least this all started to fall apart for me was the holographic projection of Gray in the last 2 episodes on the dilithium planet. On this first viewing I was irrationally angry at the idea that a telepathic projection was being treated as an actual physical ghost with a holographic shell around them. And yet on a rewatch, it really does mesh with what we know about the system on the ship in that it's translating Adira's thoughts, the projection of Gray, into an actual hologram. And the difference between what I assume Gray is like normally versus what he is while the hologram is active is that he has form, and could and does go somewhere that the others cannot, and gives them information that Adira could not possibly have gotten otherwise. Again, this makes sense, as at this point he's part of the program. This visible to everyone version of Gray is lost when they leave the destroyed ship behind on the planet. Dr. Culber promises Gray that they'll find a way to replicate this process, but I feel like this is easily remedied and shouldn't really take that much screen time to explain. They presumably have a holodeck, and the technology to replicate the system in place on the destroyed ship. And following that, there's a single piece of technology that seems to have been completely forgotten about, or deliberately ignored so far. The Doctor's mobile emitter from Voyager. Not only was the original emitter returned to the Alpha Quadrant with Voyager way back in the 24th century, giving humanity quite the leg up on the analysis and eventual production, but the technology itself was from the 29th century, meaning it's been around at this point for about 200 years. With that in mind, giving Gray a permanent body of his own separate from Adira should be trivial and could be completed in as little as 2 or 3 scenes. So no, I'm not interested as such in the progression of that part of Adira and Gray's story. What I'm far more interested in is what are the consequences of the Tal Symbiote potentially receiving parallel input from multiple quote-unquote hosts at the same time. And indeed, what happens if the holographic Gray gets too far from Adira? How much of what makes Gray Gray can be stored holographically, if any, with or without detriment to Tal? The thing that makes me a little sad is that I have all these questions, and I have this horrible feeling that they're not going to be addressed in any meaningful way. And my concern is that I've put more thought into this than the writers have. I hope that's not true, and I hope I'm not just playing apologetics for a series that just threw an idea in without thinking about it, but I guess we'll see, right? Anyway, this was a fun little deep dive. Let me know if this is something you'd like to see more of going forward. I've been Adam from Passable Media. Be sure to like and subscribe and visit the links in the description for more from us. Goodbye. Hey everyone, Adam here again. We've recently downsized where we have a presence on social media just to passablemedia.com, Twitter and Facebook to reduce the workload when we upload. We've also cut out the videoless uploads to SoundCloud. We'll now be looking to upload every Monday outside of earth-shattering real-world issues. This message is getting shorter every time I say it. Thank you to everyone and goodbye.